American uniforms and American equipment are in full control of Kabul airport today. The men inside them, however, are not US citizens, but Taliban fighters celebrating victory over the force that swept them from power 20 years ago. Carrying US rifles and driving Humvees, just some of the billions of dollars worth of equipment left behind when the Taliban claimed victory and declared Afghanistan a free and sovereign nation. The group's spokesman, Zabihullah Mujahid, spoke to reporters from the runway of Kabul airport just a few hours ago.
We have a message to any possible invader that anyone who looks to Afghanistan with bad intentions, they will face what the United States has faced today. The Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan wants good relations with the Americans through diplomacy. However, the Americans failed here. They failed. From the military perspective, they failed to achieve their goals, but the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan wants to have good relations with the whole world on behalf of the nation. We want to have strong diplomatic relations with all, including the United States.
And Taliban celebrations marking the US's withdrawal have also been taking place in other parts of the country. To show you some pictures here, this is from the southern city of Kandahar, that was once home to one of the largest NATO and coalition bases in the country. It's also the group's spiritual birthplace. In a sign of the significance of the moment of leaving the country, the US says it has now also suspended its embassy operations in Kabul. Plans to continue to assist, though, with US citizens and their families from Qatar instead. Our North America correspondent Peter Bowes sent this report.
The last American soldier to leave Afghanistan. Major General Chris Donahue boarding a cargo plane, the final flight out of Kabul. A hugely symbolic moment, bringing to an end the US mission that started shortly after the September the 11th attacks in 2001. As the C-17 disappeared into the night sky, on the ground the Taliban celebrated with gunfire and fireworks. A victory for them following 2 decades of international engagement in the country and recent weeks marked by violence, bloodshed and chaotic scenes in Kabul. The US withdrawal follows frantic efforts over the past 18 days to fly 123,000 people out of Afghanistan, including 6,000 US citizens.
This has been a massive military, diplomatic, and humanitarian undertaking, one of the most difficult in our nation's history, and an extraordinary feat of logistics and coordination under some of the most challenging circumstances imaginable.
During the evacuations, 13 US service members were killed in an attack on Kabul airport by ISK, a local branch of Islamic State. And the US now faces questions over a drone attack on suspected militants, which also claimed the lives of 10 Afghan civilians, including children. Up to 200 Americans are believed still to be in the country.
Look, there's a lot of heartbreak associated with this departure. We did not get everybody out that we wanted to get out. But I think if we'd stayed another 10 days, Louis, we wouldn't have gotten everybody out that we wanted to get out. And there still would have been people who would have been disappointed with that. It's a tough situation.
The US and its allies are now facing up to the Taliban being in charge in Afghanistan and the prospect of building a difficult diplomatic relationship, one that the Americans say will not be based on trust. Within minutes of that final US flight out of Kabul, the Taliban were in control of the airport, apparently in a reassuring mood.
My message to the public and to the Mujahideen is that they must not go for gunfire. They must celebrate this happiness by worshipping the God.
In the meantime, the Taliban's also taken control of abandoned US military hardware, including armoured vehicles and aircraft left behind during the withdrawal. The Americans say the equipment's been decommissioned or rendered useless, but for the Taliban, this is another strong symbol of their newfound power. Peter Bowes, BBC News, Los Angeles.
Well, as the final US flight departed overnight, Taliban supporters took to the streets to celebrate. Our chief international correspondent, Lisa Doucette, is in Kabul.
Well, listen, listen. Listen, look at the tracer fire in the air. The guns are going off. You can see the streams of red lights. You can see behind me the tracer fire going up in the night sky. All day we had heard the American warplanes circling above the city, flying low as we thought the last American flights were taking off, providing extra cover in these last decisive hours. But it's now the 31st of August in Afghanistan, the day that President Joe Biden said the American military mission, the 20-year engagement by US-led NATO forces, would formally end. And this is what you are hearing now, the eruption of celebratory gunfire by Taliban supporters in the city of Kabul.
Well, let's go live now to our Afghanistan correspondent Sekunda Kamani. When we saw Lisa, that was during the night time when all the celebratory gunfire. You've had a few hours now, of course, of daylight. How has it been?
Well, that celebratory gunfire really went on until the early hours of the morning. Today we saw the Taliban taking over the airport, speaking to the media really from the tarmac, where planes just a short while ago had been taking off and evacuating US soldiers. The Taliban, of course, see this as a great victory, but not everyone in Afghanistan necessarily agrees with that. I'm joined now actually by the former governor of Nangarhar province, Zia-ul-Haq Amirkhail. Thank you for spending time with us today.
Thank you very much.
As someone who was previously associated with the previous government, what are your emotions today?
Thank you very much. Since 2 weeks, the Taliban is taking the country, and everyone is waiting for them to establish a government, to form officially government. And today is a day that the U.S. forces withdrawal is completed, and now everyone is looking forward for Taliban. If the sooner they make the government, inform the government, is better for everyone. And we are waiting for that. The second, the Taliban leadership has promised the Afghans they are going to respect the fundamental rights of Afghans. And we see that if they really respect, if they meet the commitment and as well as the promises they have done it with Afghan people, absolutely there will be a positive changes. If they do not meet the commitment and as well as the promises they made it with Afghan people, there is no doubt people is going to be disappointed. And a lot of the young generation, especially the well-educated, they will leave the country, and the businessmen will leave the country, and that will be a big crisis in the future of Afghanistan. But we are really hoping. Recently, I had a few meetings with the leadership of Taliban. They have promised us, I did pass the message of people, especially the young generation, the well-educated people message to the Taliban leadership, and they have promised me that they are going to assume they have the government, they will respect the women, and they will allow the women to get their education as well as they will work too. But we will see that. We are waiting to form the Taliban, their government, and we will see how much they are going to respect and meet their commitments.
And Mr. Amirkhail, I want to talk to you more about what the future government may or may not look like. First, I also want to look back a little bit. Your province, Nangarhar, is where the city of Jalalabad was. It was the last city to fall before Kabul, and it fell peacefully without a shot being fired. Just talk me through how that went. What conversations did you have as governor of Nangarhar with the Taliban that allowed them to take over peacefully?
Honestly, Nangarhar was one of the provinces that did fought very seriously against Taliban as well as in ISIS-K. We had 22 districts, and none of the districts it was fall to the Taliban. But we were the 33rd province that before Kabul there was no other way except to have a dialogue and discussion with the Taliban, and we, thanks God, we had a peacefully transition in Nangarhar. It means there was no fight, nothing happened, no looting. It was a peaceful transition from the Afghan government to the Taliban, and I was part of it, and that happened, and then I came to Kabul. I'm staying in Kabul right now.
And now tell me, when it comes to the future government, some of my sources within the Taliban are saying that there's a distinct possibility they will re-establish the Islamic Emirate that they had in the 1990s. That might not necessarily mean they have all the same rules that they had in the 1990s, but the name will be there. Do you think that's a mistake?
Honestly, every single Afghan is waiting to form the government for Taliban. We will see that what kind of government they will have it. They are going to include the politicians, or they are going to give, chance to the Afghan women, or they are going to have only religious scholars.
Would you be happy to serve under a new government?
Honestly, I'm not going to discuss. Myself, it's not very important that I need to be the government or not in the government. But the main thing is that Taliban need to respect the Afghans. Taliban need to have an inclusive government, and Taliban need to give the right to every single Afghan, to men and women.
And in the past, Mr. Amrikil, you've been a staunch critic of the Taliban. And I ask you, frankly, do you feel safe here?
I had a few meetings with the Taliban leadership, and they have promised me that there is no issue for you. And still I'm in Kabul. I'm still meeting the young people, and I'm still meeting people. I'm still meeting the tribal leaders, the religious scholars, and convincing them not to leave the country, stay in Afghanistan, and we will see what is going to happen next. But one thing is very important, I have to be very frank, that the Taliban leadership is really trying. The Taliban leadership, whenever they have a message, the messages are wonderful, the good message is going to the people, but we are still not sure. Are they going to meet the commitment? Are they going to respect, the promises they had it with Afghan people? Everyone is waiting for Taliban to form the government and to establish the government. As soon they establish, we will see that. And we will see that, and the Afghan people will judge it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Amrikil. Well, that's the predominant sentiment I get from speaking to so many people here, one of anxiety and uncertainty about the future. Many people say that the Taliban so far have been unexpectedly conciliatory, in public at least, in their tone and attitude, but no one's quite sure how long that will last. A lot of attention is going to be focused now on what form of government emerges from all of this.
Secunda, thank you. Secunda Kamani there, live in Kabul. As Secunda was speaking to his guest, actually, the Taliban have been holding, well, they said it's an assembly. I don't think it's a press conference as such, but an assembly as it's described in Kabul to mark the US withdrawal. We're going to try and get some translation across this, so we will dip back in when we know precisely what has been said. Well, Washington's withdrawal of the troops, the US says it's also now suspended its embassy in Kabul. Plans, though, to continue to assist US citizens and their families will happen from Qatar instead. Let's go to Doha. We can speak to CBS News foreign correspondent Charlie DeGatta. Charlie, so the embassy in Kabul shut down. What exactly will the diplomatic relationship be in Doha where you are?
Well, yes, I think we have to point out that the U.S. Embassy in Kabul has now shifted here. The charge d'affaires, the U.S. ambassador, has now moved here. The U.S. Embassy has been declared. The diplomatic presence or diplomatic mission will be held here in Doha under Ross Wilson. Now, the priority, as they've said, will be on getting the remaining Americans, perhaps 200 Americans that remain in Afghanistan, and the number of Afghans who hold visas and are able to leave. Logistically, that's going to be a problem now. Nobody knows when that airport is going to reopen. It's going to take cooperation. We understand Taliban are speaking with the Qataris here and the Turks in terms of reopening that airport. It's a much different thing to have commercial flights in and out of that airfield than American military flights or coalition flights. But the Taliban have promised that they have no intention of preventing any American nationals or any foreign nationals, for that matter, from leaving the country. How they get out is another matter. They are headed to the borders in some cases, but they have made that promise not just to the United States, but to Britain and 90-plus other countries that they're not going to hold foreign nationals within Afghanistan against their will. And Secretary of State Anthony Blinken says we're going to hold them to that. They have economic levers, they have diplomatic levers, but they have other tools, other capabilities that they can bring to bear on the Taliban.
Yeah, so it's not just the States, the UK, Japan, Germany, other countries are moving to Doha as well, where, of course, the Taliban have had an office for several years now. What do we know, Charlie, about diplomatic recognition of the Taliban? Has anyone done that? Is that in the pipeline?
It may be in the pipeline, and I think that's exactly what the Taliban are banking on. Because let's face it, the Taliban are holding all the cards. But they are looking for international legitimacy, international recognition trust me when I tell you, having spent so much time in Afghanistan, they are going to need international aid. Another thing that we're going to have to talk about here, too, is they may need help in fighting this emergent or resurgent ISIS-K. This is a problem that it isn't just for the Taliban, although it's an immediate problem for the Taliban in establishing some sort of kind of security within the country itself, but it's a problem for European partners. It's a problem for the United States. And the United States has made clear that there will be attacks, if necessary, on ISIS targets in Afghanistan, even now that that August 31st deadline has passed. So yes, all of the countries that you mentioned will be establishing a diplomatic presence here. And also, as you mentioned, this is very important, those diplomatic channels have already been in place. They've been in place since the Doha talks with President Trump. So the diplomatic channels between the United States and the Taliban are already in place at a very high level. And of course, they're going to increase over the weeks and months ahead. What we don't know yet is how the Taliban are going to form this government, how they intend to have any sort of transparency when it comes to keeping itself to international world standards that will be needed in order to gain that recognition. And that's going to be key going forward.
Okay, Charlie D'Agata, good to speak to you. Thanks very much indeed. Stay with us here on BBC World News.